Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. There we go. Everybody's had their naps and everything, right? What we're going to do for you today is demonstrate the latest piece of artillery to be added to Her Majesty's arsenal. I am Captain Seamus O'Halley of the Mount Hope Train Band. And if you happen to be wondering what a train band is, in 1573, by royal decree of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, she ordered that all men between the ages of 16 and 60 be tested in the use of arms, and those who were found qualified would be inducted into the train bands. These bands would act as a national guard. There are several advantages to being in the train bands. The biggest one is the most primary concern of the Englishmen in the 16th century, and that is being drafted for foreign service, going overseas, because Elizabeth is fighting wars on 5 different fronts. She is fighting in Ireland, Scotland, France, Spain, and the Netherlands. So the idea that England stood alone with very few soldiers is quite a myth. By only a couple years into the train band program, there were 12,000 men under arms. By the time of the Armada, so 1588, Her Majesty was traveling to a little place called Tilbury, where they expected the Spanish to land. In her host, she had 62,000 men. She had six tubes of every type of artillery available at the time. This is opposed to the other 30,000 men traveling up the coast paralleling the Armada. They only had a smattering of artillery. The English really wanted to protect their queen. So you notice I keep saying artillery, not cannons. There's a very specific reason for this. This piece here, believe it or not, is not a cannon. A cannon is a very specific type of artillery. It's a very large siege piece. Its barrel would be 10 feet long. Its bore diameter would be 8 inches in diameter. It's firing shots that weigh about 32 pounds. And the barrel of this cannon would weigh between 3.5 and 4 tons. Obviously, this is not that large. This is what's known as a falconet, a much smaller field piece. Field piece, unlike a siege piece, is able to be moved around on the battlefield very quickly and very easily. This falconet is what's known as a Drake. Drake was a term they used for a slightly smaller than average piece. This one has a 5-foot barrel, an 1 3/4 bore, and all two weighs about 180 pounds. Now you notice all these fine folk moving around behind me as I started. They were loading for our first shot here. It takes an entire crew of soldiers working in unison in order to operate this weapon. Let's see, the crew positions we have are the loader. The loader is the most important person on the gun crew. We then have the rammer. The rammer is the most important person on the gun crew. Then have the vent tender. The vent tender is the most important person on the gun crew. The powder handler. The powder handler is the most important person on the gun crew. The bombardier. The bombardier is the most important person on the gun crew. And finally, the gun captain. And yes, you guessed it, the gun captain is the most important person on the gun crew. Essentially, what I'm getting at here is that even one of these people do not perform their duties correctly, someone will get injured or even killed. This is why we drill so very hard. The training bands met once a fortnight, so it's one day every 2 weeks. So, I've rambled on quite a bit, and we need to touch one thing, a little bit of safety here. When this weapon fires, it will be a bit loud, particularly for you fine folks down there at the end. I ask that you do not do one thing. That was not us. I ask that you do not do one thing. That is, take your fingers and put them in your ears. I don't mean to insult anyone, but there's a very good reason for that, and that is your heads are full of air. The concussion from this weapon, when it hits you if your fingers are in your ears, will compress that air, compressing your brain, and suddenly you've forgotten everything from the 9th grade. So in order to protect yourselves, it is much easier to simply cup your ears and slightly open your mouth. You want to pretend like you're a fish. So, without any further ado, who would like to meet our artillery piece, Regina? I'm not convinced. We're going home. Alright, one more time. Who wants to meet Regina? That's much better. Gun captain, by your will. She's in very fine form this afternoon. Now there are 21 steps in the loading and firing of this weapon, if we were going to be firing a shot. As we are not today, we reduced that number to only 13 for a salute. The first step is the vent tender will tend the vent, placing a nicely wetted thumb over the vent, or the touch hole. The loader will then search the piece using a worm. We'll run that down the barrel, turning as it go, because it's essentially a giant corkscrew, and this is to fish out any debris left over from the last shot. The rammer will then sponge the piece using a wetted sponge. He'll run that down, and this will extinguish any embers, and because of the vent tender tending the vent, this actually also creates a vacuum, further extinguishing any sparks and also drawing out any debris that may be left in the barrel. So we'll then repeat these steps just for safety. And if you listen very carefully when the rammer withdraws the sponge, you may actually hear the thump of that vacuum. So then, the powder handler will handle her charge. Cupping it nicely out of the magazine, she'll then advance the charge, handing it off to the loader. And if you notice anything shiny being handed off, that's because we're using aluminum cartridges. This is a modern safety feature we use because essentially that cartridge we could throw in the hottest part of the blacksmith's forge, and it would still be several seconds before that gunpowder heated up enough to ignite. So just in case there was an ember down there still, it won't bother us, won't put us in any sort of danger. Normally in periods, the cartridge will be made of a linen sack. So we'll then lay the charge, placing it gingerly at the end of the muzzle. The rammer will then ram home the charge, using the rammer to seat the cartridge at the bottom of the breech, and then give it 3 good strokes, making sure everything's good and compacted. Now, if we were going to load a shot, which again we are not today, we'd have some choices in our ammunition. We could fire a solid shot made of stone, lead, or most common iron. Or if things were getting a bit dicey and the infantry was getting up nice and close, we would switch to what's known as grape shot. Essentially take another linen bag and fill this linen bag full of musket balls. We would fire it, the linen bag breaks apart, the musket balls spread out, and it turns this artillery piece into an enormous shotgun, very devastating at close range. But we don't want to cause any carnage at the moment, so we will keep going with the drill. The vent fender will prick and prime. Using a copper pricker, we will break open the cartridge and then pour down the touch hole a bit of fine gunpowder that when ignited will set off the main charge. So then, he will then cover that touch hole with a glove, just in case it were windy conditions. You wouldn't want a sudden gust of wind blowing off that priming powder. So then the bombardier will advance the linstock. Upon that linstock we have slow match. Slow match is cotton or hemp rope, cotton in this case, that has been soaked in nitrates, so when ignited, burns very hot and very slow and actually keeps burning. It's a self-sustaining reaction. So, we will now assume our positions because we have arrived at the point of firing. Prepare to give fire. Give fire. Now, a good cannon crew is expected to be able to fire 2 to 3 times in a minute, just like our musketeers. And any of you who happened to come by the encampment earlier today, you saw our musketeers in action. The musketeers are expected to get 3 rounds a minute. The artillery crew is very similar. Now, obviously, they can't do that while being instructed every little step to take. Therefore, the gun captain's job gets very simple. All she needs say is, now, if you imagine for a moment yourselves on the battlefield, you're standing with your artillery piece and you're looking out against the opposing army. There are musketeers, armored pikemen, cavalry, literally chomping at the bit to get into grips with you. And you're standing there waiting because your commanding officers have met with their opposing counterparts and have decided the exact hour that the battle is going to begin. This is how it was done in the 16th century. It's great on the average soldier's nerves. Now, but once that hour does come, all hell is going to break loose. Musketeers are going to begin firing volleys. Artillery is going off. Cavalry is charging to and fro. And those armored pikemen are steadily advancing straight at you. So you're no longer doing this drill simply for the pomp and circumstance, the regimentation, the practice. You're simply doing this for survival. rather respectable time. Turn with some appreciation. Ladies and gentlemen, this actually brings us to the conclusion of our demonstration. In a few moments, we'll have the weapon made safe, and if any of you would like to ask any questions or simply come take a closer look at the piece, we will be happy to meet you right over by the catapult there, just on the other side of the road. So thank you once again for your attention.
Lord immortal man, I never can pass by it, I never dare draw nigh it, my heart it won't be quiet, up the heather glen, oh might I pluck that flower that's blooming in that glen, no sorrow that could lower would make me sad again. And might I catch that linnet, my heart, my hopes are in it. Oh, heaven itself, I'd win it